Good morning, Moscone Center. How we doing today, folks? Come on, little feedback. Yeah, there we go. I'd like to welcome you to Dreamforce and my presentation about Visualforce, AngularJS, and JavaScript remote objects. My name is Christopher Coolish. I'm a web architect for Sundog Interactive. I've been working with web development in over 10 years, starting with classic ASP, ASP.NET, PHP, and now the Salesforce platform. Sundog Interactive is a marketing and technology company. They've had experience with that for over 18 years. It's moved them from that into the creative as well as the insights world. We're doing some great things with healthcare and the industrial manufacturing markets. Our agenda today is to talk about single-page applications. Why build a single-page application? Why use AngularJS to build a single-page application? Why host a single-page application in Visualforce? And why use JavaScript remote objects in a single-page application? After we get through those topics, there will be a quick demo with a little dive into the code behind all that, and then some time for Q&A afterwards. Don't worry about trying to take snapshots of code or anything like that. I will get the code out on GitHub for you after the conference is over. Go ahead and follow me on Twitter. I'll make sure I'll get it out there. I'll get it onto the session chatter feed as well. Okay, so why build a single-page application? Single-page applications are bringing a native desktop experience to a web page. They provide a more fluid user experience than what you would with a traditional web application. Single-page applications leverage tried and true web technologies, HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript. What it really ends up doing is you're moving that UI and application logic from the server side to the client side, and that separation makes it a lot easier to test your user interface and application logic. Why use AngularJS to build a single-page application? Because AngularJS is awesome, quite frankly. It provides data binding, so you don't have to worry about manipulating the DOM as you're manipulating your data. AngularJS does that for you. It adds and removes elements to tables, lists, and stuff like that. Deep linking puts the single in the single-page application. Within one web page, you can deep link to different parts of it. So let's say you start from a list view and you get to a detail view. You can copy the link to that detail view and send it to a coworker and say, hey, check out this record. And then when they get it, they click it and it works. It's embeddable. So we're talking about single-page applications, which encompass the whole page. But the cool thing about AngularJS is you can mark up just a tiny portion of that page. Let's say you want to take advantage of the cool features on just marking up a simple table in your Visualforce page or something else. You can use it at that small scale, or you can scale it up and build a whole bunch of applications on one page and just create widgets. It's modular, it's embeddable, it's really awesome. From the core, AngularJS has dependency injection built into it, which makes it really easy to test. So you're able to write testable JavaScript code, which, let's all face it, if you've ever done that before, it's pretty hard. So why host a single-page application in a Visualforce page? Probably because the reason we're all here, because we have data in Salesforce that we want to access. And so the beauty of that is you're already authenticated. You don't have to use OAuth to authenticate to any APIs or anything like that. You can leverage existing Apex logic if you choose by using JavaScript remoting. You can leverage JavaScript remote objects to access the data if you need to without having to write any Apex. So the beauty is there's no need to proxy API calls through a server-side application or anything like that. So why use JavaScript remote objects in a single-page application? JavaScript remote objects creates proxy objects in your JavaScript code for you to access your custom and standard objects in Salesforce. So you don't have to write any Apex code to do any DML operations. You can perform that stuff right on the client side inside JavaScript. This makes it so there's no Apex required. You can manipulate your data without writing a single line of Apex. There is also no API limits on your JavaScript remote object calls. So any method calls used within that framework allow you don't count towards your API limits. Now, it is overridable. So let's say you do have some complex logic where you're manipulating multiple records at once. you can write Apex logic in the back end that allows you to do that complex logic and still leverage the JavaScript remoting to actually call that method instead of the standard one. So it makes life a lot easier. Hey, how about that? We're already to the demo. So let's take a look at the little demo I put together. All right, so here's my my contact manager application. And so this is actually my Visualforce page that I've landed at. And you can see I just have it set up to load 5 records. So as well as being a web architect at Sundog, I'm also the homebrew master there. So I like to keep track of everybody's favorite beer, so I know what to purchase for the company parties, and as well as what to brew. So here we have it. This page is built entirely with JavaScript, using AngularJS and JavaScript remote objects. There's no Apex behind this at all. And so right off the bat, what do you get? Well, you get sorting just out of the box. So I have this favorite beer category. I can sort my results just by clicking right on it. I want to sort by last name. I can do that. I want to load some more records, so I'm going to put just a 25 and hit more records. And there they come. I'm going to go all out. I'm going to load the rest. And there we go. So the other great thing you get from this is the ability to filter your records. You can go ahead and just type right in here. So I'm going to type in and see how many people like stouts. There, see, Ashley James, she likes stouts. If I want to find other people that have Anderson in them. Oh, no Andersons in the system. All I'm doing right now is just a simple substring search across all the properties of my JavaScript objects. So, if I wanted to find 003 or any of the records that end with AAS, here's all the records that end with AAS. So it's really simple and easy to do these kind of great features like filtering and sorting. I'm going to go ahead and create a new record quick. Got to get myself in this database so I know what beer to brew for myself. And I'm a stout person myself, so. And so here's an example of that two-way data binding there. So, as I type in this text box, you can see this little full name thing gets shorter or longer there. And that's happening in real time. That's me binding that element back to the AngularJS code, and it works great. So I'm going to hit save. And there you can see my name up there. Christopher Coolish and Stout. Now this just jumping between pages, that's all that's been within one single Visualforce page. This isn't a full page refresh every time. This is leveraging views within a master template, which we'll take a look at here quickly. And in the end, I can go ahead and delete myself out of there if I want to. And a list refresh. So again, that data table, or that table, it's a simple HTML table. I'm using AngularJS to bind it to a list of JavaScript objects, and as that list is manipulated, added, removed to, this automatically updates. I didn't have to do a bunch of code to add a TR row and then add TD to every element. So let's jump on over to the actual code behind this now. And so this is the actual Visualforce page here. And so this is the single page of the single page application. So we're using the whole Visualforce page, and we're leveraging the body tag to be the container for our AngularJS app. So we get into the JavaScript remote object side of things right here at the top. And so what we're doing here is we're declaring what objects in Salesforce we want to create JavaScript proxy objects for. And so what you can see here is I'm declaring for my contact object, I want to create a contact gateway. That's just my JavaScript shorthand name. It could be anything. It could be late for dinner if I wanted it to be. But that just gives you a nice way to create a nice JavaScript shorthand name for it. These are the fields I'm loading up here: ID, first name, last name, created date. A nice feature, though, is that you can also map individual fields to a friendlier JavaScript name. So standard fields are pretty friendly as it is, but here's my favorite beer category. It's your standard __C custom field. Well, I can remap that in my JavaScript code to be a really friendly JavaScript name that I can kind of use throughout. I should give credit. I am using Bootstrap to make that app pretty. That's not AngularJS. That's a little Bootstrap thrown in there just to add a little pizzazz to it. I am, however, actually compressing this whole application up into an individual zip. So you can see that here I'm using the notation to access a static object and pull individual resources in that way. Here we can see we're getting to our first Angular piece of code, and this is called a directive. So directives are the custom behavior that you can add to attributes and elements inside your single page application. The ng app directive just happens to bootstrap your application. So what I'm simply stating here is saying, this body tag, everything that happens within here is happening in the context of my contact manager module, which is, we'll see the code for that in a bit. The other piece of here that we're using here is this component here. So this is the ngView directive, and this is one way of doing view routing within your application. So the body tag is the container for my app, and then the ngView tag is where I'm moving in templates in and out. So as I click to new or come back to my list, this is the container that's refreshing. I'm leveraging ng-route, which is an extension or an additional module you can download. There's other modules available that do routing and have some different pros and cons to them. And at the end of my Visualforce page here, you can see this is me just loading up all my necessary JavaScript libraries. This is the actual app module. Here's an entity that I'm using for mapping the data back and forth. And here's my controller objects that we'll dive into next. So right here you can see the app.js. This is the actual module that's loading. I'm using some Angular commands to tell Angular, hey Angular, I have this module called Contact Manager. Right here you can see I'm declaring a dependency. My app is dependent on ng-route. So if you were to load this page up and that wasn't there, you'd get a nice big JavaScript error that says, hey, your app depends on this module. It's not here. It's not going to run. I'm also using a constant. I'm declaring a constant. Because I'm using the static resource to store my app in, I need a direct reference, or I need a link to my individual templates. And so this is a little trick I found online that says, if you want to access the resources within a static resource, your individual files, you can use resource / the current date timestamp, and then the path to your module. So where I'm using this is I'm actually injecting it into the config for the application, and this is what we can see here. So I'm saying I need the route provider, I need the resource URL, and then this is my constructor method within here, you can see. And so it passes, AngularJS automatically passes those into my config method. Now if either of those weren't present, it'd throw another error and crash at us. And so mostly what's going on in my config is I'm just configuring my routes. So I have a route here for my home page, which is the contact list template, bound to a controller. I have /new, which is bound to the new template and the contact new controller. And when all other routes fail, I just say go back to the home page. And the other nice thing I'm injecting is here I'm using a service to inject the contact gateway. Contact gateway, this is the actual S-object module. This is the proxy object that JavaScript most objects has created for us. So I'm actually injecting that in my AngularJS app, and then at any controller, I can just reference contact gateway, and it knows to inject that and pass that along to my constructor. So we'll jump over to a much larger template, one that has a little bit more going on to it, and we can dive into the directives and the template tags a little bit more. So this is the list page. This is the page that we arrive at when we first load the application. Right here you can see I'm using the ng model directive, another AngularJS directive. This is that two-way data binding. This is saying bind the value of this input to the query variable in my scope for this controller. And so this simple line of code is what binds it so that when I type in the query, it says, hey, query is being updated, and filters my list of stuff. Here we can get into some more of them. So ng-click. The ng-click directive just evaluates the expression whenever the item's clicked. So whenever I click on these links, these are my header links here, I'm just declaring a different column to sort by and a different direction to sort by. And these are just simply expressions that are evaluated inside the current scope of the controller. So here's one of the more powerful directives that Angular gives you, one of the best tools in the toolbox for this. And so ng-repeat is a directive that says repeat the element I'm on, use the element I'm on as a template and repeat it for the number of items in this list. So what I'm saying is for every contact in persons, go ahead and create a row, and then these are the different templating expressions grabbing the property names on that object. So here's the ID, the first name, the last name, the favorite beer category. And so this directive is built with additional filters in it. So here's that filter query. This is what's doing that filtering, that substring match, just saying filter equal to this variable in my scope. So whatever I type in that query box up top, it's filtering out those methods. That's all that it takes. And then I'm also passing it to another filter called order by, which is just saying order by column and whether or not to reverse it or not. So with this one line here, I'm creating a data table that'll grow or shrink based on my data, the list in the back end in the JavaScript, as well as being able to filter it and sort it just right with that one line of code, which if you've ever tried to do that in jQuery or other libraries, it's usually a separate extension, separate plugin you got to bring in. So right out of the box, you get that power. Here's an example of an ngClick directive that allows you to actually call another method. This is on the delete button. So when you click on delete, it's selecting the current contact inside the current scope and then kicking up the dialog box to do the actual delete. And so this is the template code. Let's take a look at the controller code that's behind this template. And here it looks a lot similar to the actual module, the contact manager module. But what we're doing here is we're pulling in our contact module. We're telling, hey, Angular, for the contact manager module, I got this controller. And it's called the contact list controller. This contact list controller is dependent on the scope variable, which this is the variable that your template's using to bind variables to, as well as the contact gateway. And so when AngularJS needs to instantiate it, it looks for those two dependencies and then injects them into the constructor function. So here I start manipulating that scope. I create my persons array, which is what's populated and controls the table. Here, the drop-down menu of limits, I'm creating an array of just some variables. It automatically repeats through those and creates that for me. I'm setting the selected limit to 5. I'm setting the starting offset to 0. The offset helps with my load more records method. And then I'm also setting a variable to show more records to true. This is actually controlling whether or not that button is visible or not. And I'm setting the starting query to something empty, and setting that predicate, which is what I'm filtering on, the column I'm filtering on, to create a date, and just setting the reverse to true. Now I've created this load more records function inside my scope, and this one is actually bound to that load more records button. And so this is where we start to get into the actual JavaScript remote objects JavaScript code. So this criteria is a JSON object that is the formatting is declared by Salesforce, and it's what you pass into the retrieve method to actually query out your methods. So it contains your where predicates if you want to filter, your order by clauses, and your limit clauses. And so here I'm just starting to take that in and say, okay, my default query, we're just going to order by created date descending. For the limit, I'm going to parse the int. I'm going to parse the selected limit variable that's in my scope. Here I'm checking to see, do I need to add an offset to it? So if my offset's greater than 0, yeah, I'm going to apply the offset to it. And then here we're calling contact gateway. This is that proxy object that got instantiated, got passed into my controller through Angular, and we're calling the retrieve method on it, and we're passing in the criteria. And so you pass in the criteria, and then like any good Ajax method, you give it a callback method. And so that's what this method is right here. And so you get back an error message, which if it's set, there is an error. The results array, which is an array of the results you got back, and then of course the event object. And so my bulletproof error handling here, if error alert and return. But here we do the scope offset. Here I'm appending the scope, the amount of records to my scope length, so that my offset gets increased as that goes. If the results length is less than my scope limit, that means I don't have any records to show. I'm going to turn that button right off. And then for each result, I'm going to pass it through this method call. And so I'm cheating a little bit here, just to simplify it. I'm instantiating this contact entity object, which is a simple JavaScript object that I've created properties for. You can see ID, first name, last name, created date. Those are the ones we bound to on that table. What I'm actually doing is I'm passing in the object that we get back from JavaScript remoting, and I'm looping through and calling the get methods on it. And so with AngularJS, the querying is a simple subscreen match against properties, but it can be more advanced too. You could write a custom method call that would query through these default model objects and call the get method on it. But just so I could cover my bases and hit all the property fields, I abstracted it down to the smaller level. But here you can say I'm get ID, get first name. Here you can see I'm leveraging those names I loaded as well as the shorthand name to actually get the data and put it into my entity and return it. And so that's what's going on right here. I'm creating that entity object, and then I'm pushing it to my array. And here's the tricky thing, is that this callback method lives outside of the AngularJS realm. So you have to call this scope.apply to say, hey, Angular, outside of your scope, I've been updating your data. You need to refresh the UI because I've made changes to it that you don't know about it. So that scope.apply says, oh, okay, let me go through and call all the necessary bits and pieces to update your view for you. So that's kind of where one of the nice features there is. So when you do modify something out of scope, you do have the ability to pass that update out there. And so right here in the controller, I am calling load more records right away to get those 5. And then there's a few other method calls, the select method and delete contact. So that's all. There's more to that demo. We can dive deeper into that, but I did want to open it up to questions here at the end. So if you could come up and use the microphone, that'd be great. You've got questions, I got answers. Don't come right up.
Where are you making the initial SOQL call to actually get the data out of Salesforce system?
Sure. That retrieve method is the SOQL call. So the way my controller works is when the controller is instantiated, it calls load more records one time. And so that's this method right here. And so load more records is calling retrieve on the JavaScript of proxy object. And so this retrieve call is basically your select SOQL query. And this is the method call that Salesforce exposed through that proxy object to do that. And so like I said, with the criteria object you pass in, this is where you can specify your where predicate, the filter with, your order by, and your limit clauses.
Do your SOQL limits actually factor in over here in your call?
The SOQL limits aren't because you're limited to 100 records each time. So you can only call retrieve at 100 records at a time. So that's why I have my load more records method button. Go right ahead.
Do you use any other tools for testing JavaScript other than browser-based tools?
I haven't on this project. I've gone through some different demos and tried different things. Mostly what the AngularJS demo project goes through and how they show you. I found those to be really good. I haven't figured out how to apply that to the Salesforce realm yet, just because Salesforce lives in the cloud. It's hard to get those tests to execute out there in the Salesforce environment. I haven't quite figured out how to do that. So ideally, with the way it's modularized, the only page you can't run against is that Visualforce page. And so you could write individual tests against those tiny templates and at least test your templates out, and knowing that, the basic logic in that Visualforce page is a little bit smaller, have pretty good code coverage.
One of the tools mentioned is Protractor. I don't know if you've used that in the context of Visualforce.
Yeah, I think that's the one that I was using with it.
Okay.
That's the one that, again, with the AngularJS demo that they have, that's the one they walk you through. And to me, I didn't even know I was writing unit tests. It flowed so smoothly, and it was really nice. So that's what really excites me about AngularJS, is bringing that order to the chaos of a JavaScript project and make it testable and repeatable and all kinds of that
There's
stuff.
a pretty strong community that supports
that too. That's also very encouraging. Google's is behind it. So
thanks.
Yep, thank you.
Howdy.
Howdy.
Is this all bidirectional?
What do you mean by bidirectional?
You were showing the JavaScript was brought in, and then you were able to do deletes on the actual JavaScript list and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When I'd make that delete, does that actually make the delete of the contact or whatever
Yes.
into Salesforce?
Yes. So the logic behind the delete is this: you hit delete, it grabs the ID of the object you're deleting, instantiates that remote object with that ID, or instantiates that remote object proxy, calls delete on it, passing in that ID. And then the callback method when it succeeds, goes ahead and pulls it out of my array.
And so all of this is fully bidirectional then. If I delete it, I update it, and I have permissions to do so, then it's going to go away.
Exactly, yep.
How's it going? What about paginations on the results?
Pagination. So I don't think there's a way out of AngularJS to do pagination, and really a lot of pagination is UI in terms of dividing out my results. I had this question internally as well, is how could can it do pagination? So I think it could facilitate it really easy just with using that standard query function. So let's say you think about the standard list view in Salesforce and it's A to Z and other. You could write a real simple filter that you click that button, it sets the query equal to starts with A, and like that. And then that comes more so. I think AngularJS could facilitate it really easy and help you do that, but it just kind of depends on the front end framework you're using to do it. So
cool, thank you.
I saw a lot of separate JS files, and it means a lot of HTTP traffic. Did you think about like combining or minifying the JS files?
I think you probably could. I don't see why you couldn't. The fact that it's a single page application means, that when that first page loads, all those script files loads, and as you're working, it's not a full page list. You're not reloading those all the time. So I don't think from a performance standpoint you necessarily have to, but I use Grunt to build and compress it. You certainly could add a minify step to it and minify it all down to one production ready file, just to be on the safe side.
Yeah, if you are targeting mobile users, you have to do everything to make it more minified.
Right.
Thanks.
So you're using remote objects. How would things change if I want to pull down multiple related objects, right?
Right.
Accounts, and would I use a subselect if I use a subselect or multiple queries?
You're talking sort of a master detail.
Yeah. How would that change?
That's where you'd get into those overridable methods. You would have to then probably write some Apex logic in the back end to say, when retrieve is called on my JavaScript remote object, use this logic to query out the records that are needed. And I believe through those methods you end up building out a JSON response that would then structure your data, so pulling out your accounts to whatever, your master to your parent to your children records and stuff like that. And so that's one thing I don't have an example of, but when you're declaring your remote object model, this is where you can pass in those at remote action methods on a controller somewhere that you could then call out, that you could override the retrieve method, delete, update. So that would be a little bit more advanced. That's where you take advantage of that ability to override them and have to write Apex. So you could declare multiple object models here, and then in your JavaScript, kind of build out a map or something like that if you wanted to. You certainly could do that way, because you could have the one remote object model query out your parent record, the other one then query out children based on it, and just knowing that you can do 100 at a time. That'd be one approach to it.
Hi. I saw the examples where we are showing up the text fields. Like, if there are any date fields that you want to manipulate with, does the locale settings of the user handle with AngularJS?
I'm not sure if the location settings are you talking about location settings from
the locale
Salesforce?
settings, like the DDMMYY versus the MMDDYY, because I may be a UK user, I don't want a MMDDYY
right.
when the page loads. So we currently are using AngularJS and having this problem, like we have to write some codes behind the scenes to handle it at the back end, but is there something from the front end when the page loads, different users can see a different representation of the same date?
I'd have to look into that more to see if you could add, if there was some conditional logic you could put behind it. I haven't really looked into see what sort of user context you have when you're in the JavaScript. So I mean, one thing you could do is somewhere in your contact list controller when it's instantiated, if you could see that user's locale settings or whatever, add some logic in here to actually put the format for the date to what you wanted it to be, or the custom logic around the date. So
in that case, it would be kind of a manual logic. Like I need to find out all the locales that are present in my organization and then take like required actions. Like for example, one of the columns I saw was create a date. Now create a date you're loading is maybe in a one format, but if I'm a user from a different locale, I may be interested in seeing are used to seeing the dates in a different format, like a
right.
Yeah.
There is a date filter on within AngularJS, and that's what I was using here, passing the create a date to the date filter medium. So there are different formats you could spit it out in for sure. The tricky part would be figuring out what date format you would want to put it into.
Exactly.
I'd have to dig into the code deeper to take a look. Sounds like a fun problem to solve.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for attending. Thank you for the questions. Oh, follow me on Twitter. Thank you, everybody.